You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my disembodied co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Thanks to a bit of techno-sorcery, we'll be remote, but by the same token, ever present. So get ready to go with us against the grain. We have another awesome show for you today. We're going to delve into what's going on behind the scenes in the Democratic primary. Is there buyer's remorse over Joe Biden as the frontrunner? Is there a groundswell of support to replace Joe Biden with someone more lucid and capable of higher order thought? To discuss, we have political consultant Donna Davis to give an update on what's going on behind the scenes in the Democratic primary. In the second hour, we're going to get back to what's taking place in our prison system and policing in the middle of a pandemic. I mentioned yesterday, we have 5% of the world's population with 25% of the world population in our prisons, basically in American cages. They are conditions that are ripe for the spread of the virus in the prison population itself, or the potential to spread the virus by cops who got infected on the job. Today is Friday. How strong do you feel? Is there something on your mind, something that's been bugging you, a perspective of either Bob or I that you disagree with, or for that matter, agree with? This is your chance to call in for the most combative segment on the network. And if I'm being honest, one of my favorites, come at me, bro. Come at me, bro. Your calls and tweets are amply appreciated. You guys and your engagement make this show what it is, so please feel free to call in. The number is 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. Also, if you're digging what we're putting down, and only if you're digging what we're putting down, please share the video. It helps with algorithmic visibility and gives us a like if you indeed like the content. But let's start here. I have been nursing a not-so-quiet rage over the last several weeks. It's not been isolated to one thing. There are several items, several environmental and circumstances factors screwing with my disposition. Sanders having chances and not accentuating those chances because Biden was his buddy, the betrayal of Warren and the subsequent members of the left screaming for her to be made vice president, and of course, always a trigger point of frustration, incompetence, and corruption. The brazen discrepancy between what one legitimately expects from rational actors versus what actually occurs. In real terms, our reality will persistently get worse. And I'm stuck with the uncomfortable knowing that it didn't have to be this way. We had months of advanced knowledge of what was coming and its severity to the person, and by extension, to the economy itself. And yet, emancipatory incompetence that catered to the wealth of the nation over the actual wealth of the nation, meaning the human beings. 12,075 new cases, 6,552 deaths, 482 of which are new. 52 deaths, 482 of which are new. CNN's reported that 4 weeks ago, there were 227 cases, 3 weeks ago, 1,645 cases, 2 weeks ago, 1,229 cases, 1 week ago, 82,100 cases, and right now, 256,952 cases. Now, of course, American exceptionalism is not going to demand us to figure out what's wrong, not going to demand us to figure out the cultural defects or the ideological defects that has allowed this to proliferate in the way that it's proliferated. No, American exceptionalism demands that we blame somebody else. So you have the Republican Party out there blaming China. Oh, they didn't give us the information fast enough, as if we couldn't tell the severity of this particular pandemic, or they didn't know the severity of this particular pandemic. They're blaming Obama. Oh, Obama, he didn't do X or he didn't do Y. It's his fault. They're even going so far as to blame Democrats, saying this impeachment distracted us from actually dealing with the crisis at hand. Impeachment had been over with, all the way back to December. All of these are just excuses. You have the Democratic Party that is accusing the Republican Party of basically having blood on their hands. The same Democratic Party that is pushing to continue the elections. Understand the reality of this. This is utterly ludicrous. Everybody else is going to get the blame except putting the blame where it lies. And I, for one, am not going to accept putting that blame anywhere else. All of those deaths, that are going to take place. The president that, for the most part, pretended as if the deaths or this wasn't a big deal. That president is now saying 200,000 deaths is not just acceptable, but it would mean that we did a good job. But again, for something that we already knew that was coming. We have the capabilities of sending a nuclear sub or nuclear plane or jet, or ship over across the world in order to threaten and to attack other nations. By the same token, we didn't have the ventilators, we didn't have the masks, we didn't have the protective equipment, we didn't have the medicines, we didn't have the vaccines, we didn't have the test kits. Incompetence and issues of priority. Because instead of attending to the material needs of the population, we decided that the thing that mattered more than anything else was profit. So instead of making a ventilator that was cheap, that would be available to pretty much anybody who needed one without paying thousands and thousands of dollars, that was nixed because it was too expensive. Instead of putting the money into the vaccines, that was nixed because that was too expensive. It wasn't profitable enough. Our entire system is based on this nonsense. Exceptionalism. We're going to blame others. And my point here is don't blame anybody else. Don't blame China. Don't blame Russia. Don't blame Venezuela. Don't blame Iran. Put the blame where it lies, on your political class, Democrats and Republicans, made worse by the fact that we give them a blank ticket in regards to the way they run their campaigns. That it's not a notion of putting somebody in for what they're going to do, but putting somebody in for who they are not. It's a race to the bottom that, for the most part, emboldens this level of malfeasance and incompetence. Jared Kushner doesn't know what stockpiles are. Let's hear this clip. I'm going to make my arguments here. Let's hear the clip of Jared Kushner not knowing what a stockpile is.
And you have instances where in cities they're running out, but the state still has a stockpile. And the notion of the federal stockpile was it's supposed to be our stockpile. It's not supposed to be state stockpiles that they then use. So we're encouraging the states to make sure that they're assessing the needs, they're getting the data from their local situations, and then trying to fill it with the supplies that we've given them. The same thing with the masks.
How stupid is that? That's what stockpiles are. That is literally what stockpiles are. You are supposed to get those products out into the areas across the United States that needs those products. You shouldn't have Cuomo out there begging for ventilators or other governors begging for materials and products. How on earth can you be in that position of authority and not know the purpose and the usage of stockpiles? We have Brian Kemp, governor in Georgia, who didn't know or only found out yesterday that COVID-19 was infectious, even if the person wasn't showing symptoms. Let's hear this bizarre clip.
I think it's the reason I'm taking this action. Just like I've continued to tell people, I'm following the data, I'm following the advice of Dr. Toomey. Her and I both mentioned in our remarks, finding out that this virus is now transmitting before people see signs. So what we've been telling people from directives from the CDC for weeks now, that if you start feeling bad, stay home. Those individuals could have been infecting people before they ever felt bad. Well, we didn't know that until the last 24 hours. And as Dr. Toomey told me, she goes, this is a game changer for us.
This was already known. This was not some magical thing that they didn't necessarily know. It was understood that the virus could be spread whether or not the people were showing symptoms. Let's go to another one. The Republican Party or the Democratic Party, as you say, we're listening to the doctors, we're listening to their advice. Not the Democratic Party. Joe Biden has made the choice and has been pushing Joe Biden, Simone Sanders, and implicit for them not coming out and saying anything contrary. The DNC have gone ahead by pushing the election coming up, meaning even though they're postponing the convention, they're maintaining the elections that are coming up. Now, Joe Biden put out a tweet over Donald Trump saying basically, this is a disastrous thing that's going to cost lives. Yeah, but you are also not for Medicare for all. Your healthcare plan is going to cost 125 deaths, and that's already 60-some thousand deaths a year because people not having healthcare. So let's be very clear on this notion of who's causing deaths. Also, the fact that you're perfectly willing to keep this election going against the advice of medical professionals is abominable. Let's hear this doctor begging Wisconsin to postpone the election coming up in Wisconsin.
Hi, my name is Richard McGowan. I'm an internal medicine physician in Madison, and I'm recording this message as a call for Governor Evers and other decision makers, including members of the Wisconsin State Legislature, to postpone our spring primary scheduled on April 7th. As it stands, if polls were kept open on the date, it would jeopardize public health while also infringing on our democratic right to vote. On March 24th, when Governor Evers ordered the state to shelter in place, there were 506 cases and 5 deaths from the COVID-19 virus pandemic. Today, there are over 1,300 cases and there have been 16 deaths, more than double the cases and 3 times the deaths in a short amount of time. Governor Evers, you ordered the people of Wisconsin to shelter in place to slow down the spread of COVID-19, and that was the right call. However, keeping the election scheduled on April 7th is a reckless and irresponsible decision and could lead to people needlessly suffering. It also goes against your own order and the CDC's guidelines to limit social interactions during these next 6 to 8 weeks in order to flatten the curve. We saw significant problems ensue in both Illinois and Florida when they chose to proceed with their elections, including poll workers contracting COVID-19 who may have inadvertently infected numerous voters that went to the polls that day. The other issue is democracy. A large number of people will be unable to vote because of the unrealistic deadlines that we're upholding right now. The workaround that you've proposed of providing absentee ballots to all voters is not feasible for multiple reasons, with the city of Madison already saying they're not going to be able to comply with all their requests because of the massive increase. The other issue is that absentee ballots require witnesses, which goes against the logic of your shelter-in-order placing people who've likely been more mobile during the shelter-in-place order with people who are more isolated, older, and probably at higher risk of complications.
Yes, the doctor has to beg for them to postpone an election, something that is a contrived position. But look, my very basic point here is the Democratic Party and Republican Party are taking actions that are going to cause a loss of life for their own political whims. To some degree, this boils down to us. Yesterday, 6.6 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits. That is clearly a new record. At the worst of the economic crash, it was 665,000. And to some degree, this boils down to us. We don't have political accountability. We continue to choose people who, for the most part, not because they're what they're going to do, but for what they're going to effectively keep out the office. This is a level of cowardice, and this level of cowardice, for the most part, has disadvantaged us, especially in situations where we need the political system to actively respond in credible and rational ways to ameliorate the worst aspects of a potential crisis or even the economic system in and of itself. Don't blame anyone else for the malfeasance and screw-ups of your own society. Bob, there are times where you become very aware of problems and defects in your society, especially in cases of emergencies and who our political space attunes itself to. It's like a slap in the face. And this goes to your whole thing of organizing because the political space doesn't care about you.
Yeah, and I hear you. And the thing that always stresses me out or makes me most upset, well, you mentioned Jared Kushner. That makes me most upset first and foremost. Brian Kemp's amazing remarks there. I mean, I don't know how you say something like that. That'd be terrifying. You're the governor of a state and you're saying not until 24 hours ago did you know that this virus could pass between asymptomatic people. That's like, that's like next level of incompetency. But for me, it goes back to this idea, this great compromise between two ruling parties is going to give you an output that is acceptable to the masses of people. And we see this Joe Biden reaching out to Donald Trump saying, I would love to talk about the COVID-19 response. Who are these people to think that there's some compromise to be had between Republicans and Democrats that magically works out for people? When you have people like Brian Kemp in Georgia, you have Jared Kushner in the ear of his father-in-law, Donald Trump, and then you have people like Joe Biden who are basically saying, I know you're all dying because you don't have health care, but don't worry, I'm still not going to give you health care. That's the two parties that are somehow finding a compromise, and that's what Joe Biden's running on. He's the guy that says, I talked to Donald Trump. I know we all hate the guy, but he's still president. Good old golly shucks, vote for me so I can take over. Jamara, what logic is this? And people always turn back to that. They say, Bob, you're too radical. Bernie Sanders, he wants to burn things down. That's no way to have it. We're a two-party system that deals through compromises. What's that compromise getting you right now, Jamara?
Nothing. That's the catch, right? And this is kind of why I take that strident stand. I don't think it's radical at all, Bob. I think it makes all the rational sense in the world to say I'm not going to vote for something if it's not in my interest. And if what you've done up to this point hasn't necessarily made gains. I mean, a lot of this, believe it or not, this is why I have a hard time blaming human beings for this. Because I look at this as an issue of education. And the implicit education that they've gotten over the past 50 years is we can't do big things. We can't do things regarding our society. John F. Kennedy goes out and screams, we're going to the moon. And he makes that argument that this is This is organized as the best of our capabilities. This is a task that we're not willing to. Like, think of that emancipatory language where this ape, from a galactic scheme of things, just a hair away from being an ape, is screaming, we're going to the moon. We have no idea how to do it. We have no idea how to pull this off technologically, but we're going to do it anyway. That's the level of revolutionary, or at the very least, expansive thought and expansive politics that used to be part of the Democratic Party. These days, they've gotten so horrendous that in a situation of a crisis, $1,200 is enough for the public to be, okay, that's fine. It's astonishing. But that's learned. I guess that's my point. That's learned behavior. That's learned behavior because over the past 40, 50 years, you have Democrats functioning in this idea of incrementalism, screaming that you can't do big things. Bob, am I off of that? I am blown away by the time change that we're currently in, where this notion where you have every opportunity in the world to get something accomplished, and the party structure is entirely incapable of actually doing it.
Yeah, I don't want to rile you up too much because I know we're going to come at you later today, but that's the whole failure of Elizabeth Warren as a political character that anybody thought she was. She was the big structural change person. She fell in line within the Democratic Party when she was told to step down. That's your leader? The leader just stepped down in a time of crisis. Where has Elizabeth Warren been the last month? She doesn't have the big structural plan. She doesn't have the votes to get a big structural plan, system change, whatever she was calling it. It's this incredible boring level of politics, Jamal, to me, where there is no creative imagination. We have politicians telling you in this city, Washington, D.C., New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, we can't solve our homelessness problem. Wish we could. Those cities all have major developers buying up real estate on the dollar for what it's cost to house luxury apartments and the global elite that can have multiple homes around the world. There's more empty homes than there are homeless people, but yet we have a political class right now, Jamar, that says, wish we could house those people if only we could figure it out. I don't know at what point it like you said, how do you organize the masses to do that? And that comes to me for Sanders' real failure is that comes with so much political education. Sanders needs a groundswell of people educating people across the country of what's happening to them, not what's happening at the federal, what's happening with Bernie Sanders, who Bernie Sanders is, but really getting people to say, look, this is how you're getting screwed over every single day. Look across the street. You see those luxury condos. Those aren't for you. Somebody has to connect those dots for people, Jamal. And I think that's the biggest thing missing in America is there's not enough grassroots political educators to help that groundswell to happen. And there sure isn't any cable news that's going to help that process. And if people are tuning in to Washington Post, New York Times, MSNBC, The Daily Show, John Oliver, these shows, they're good for entertainment value, but they're not going to actually educate people on exactly how they're getting screwed over in a very corrupt system to a point where then they're going to actually engage electorally to get in that politician we want them to vote for.
No, I agree with you. But there's a comment. It says true, but you guys have to understand JFK. I don't know what the other part is trying to say. Look, it's not that I don't think JFK's speech was warmongering. I mean, look, it was a Cold War. JFK was making that speech and make that argument because he wanted to get to space first, but he was coding it in this American exceptionalism. We got to get there first because we're the people who believe in freedom and justice, and we need to plant our flag on the moon for freedom, that type of stuff. But that speech is emancipatory. And when you listen to a speech like that, or a speech like FDR, like when he's making this argument of the capitalist class and these vicious, ruthless arguments against that particular class. And then you look to where we are now. It's dramatic departure between those things. And you're right. It is an issue of education. If people understand that basically there is no point to the way our society is arranged, that our society can be arranged in any particular way that we want, that we can set ourselves up where workers and the poor and the 99% are the ones, or your society is attuned to the needs of that group as opposed to the needs of a 1%, that it's rational as rational could be for something like that to be. But you have to explain that, because from people's understanding and the way that people tend to operate, it's small incremental changes. It's not these wide introspective epiphanies. It's often they go from point A to point B, making just small general changes as they move along in their political space. It's not something that they overly question, especially if the question is never asked. Meaning if no one says, hey, we need to tax the rich, then if that question is never asked, the political parties don't have any incentive in asking that question. The oligarchs that pay the media has no incentive in asking that question. The media, all of which are rich, have no incentive in asking that question. So the question doesn't get asked. From their perspective, in regards to what's normal and what's natural, well, that part is just not part of the conversation. So it does take a certain degree of education. I agree with you, Bob.
Yeah, 202-521-1320. I want to mention something on Kennedy there, Jamal. I don't think we've talked much about his speeches since we've been on the show together, but I think of his strategy for peace speech he gave in 1963 at one of my alma maters, American University. And there is something very important for a leader to lay out a strategy, even if you're saying the guy's doing warmongering or he's doing other things that he's listening to the Department of State and Department of Defense. At least he's talking about what it would look like to have a process of peace and laying out those different issues. And that's what frustrated me so much with Elizabeth Warren versus Bernie Sanders, where Warren was just kind of genuflexing to these broad general ideas, where Sanders was actually starting to lay into a strategy of like plan one when it came to economic and racial justice, ending incarceral rates for those who have been arrested for marijuana sales, or having voting rights for all people that are currently incarcerated, and actually ticking through a list of things. And I think at least Kennedy was offering kind of a ban strategic certain types of weapons between people and the Cold War, having at least a kind of a checklist through things that I appreciate. And right now, I don't think we're getting that from a Joe Biden or from any of these kind of overarching Democratic figures outside of Sanders in many ways that actually can tick through and say like what that means to people. Biden can say, oh yeah, sure, all healthcare costs related to coronavirus are covered. Well, that doesn't actually then break down into actually actionable, meaningful items. And without anybody laying that out for people, we're never actually going to be able to walk through a process that transforms society.
No, I agree with you. But this kind of gets to my reason why I say this to some degree, it's our fault. It's this kind of weird mix where it's difficult to point blame per se. It's almost you're stuck with kind of a situation just based on how people are in our particular system. I mean, basically, we don't hold our political leaders accountable. I mean, basically, we make a vote, it's dollars or pitchforks. And for the longest time, you've just had pitchforks. And without any level of push on the system, any level of accountability in the system, meaning a person can act a particular way and there's no consequence, then they don't have to give that policy. Like Joe Biden, when he ran this race, if you notice in the beginning, Joe Biden wasn't putting out policy at all. He was just ready because he knew they didn't care. For Joe Biden, his pathway to get into office was basically, I'm the guy that can beat Trump. Nobody cared about the policy. And if you're voting for somebody only because of the person who they're going to beat, that person is still doing stuff in that office. And you're putting somebody in that office entirely just because of who they're not. Like it requires something else in the way that we're doing our politics, especially on the left. And maybe it's an organization, Bob.
Yeah, I'm just laughing too. I just think of I had emailed one of my representatives here in Washington, D.C. after they offered no help or support to resolving a problem on one of the many developer-run properties that are within my neighborhood that are owned by super extremely wealthy people that live in Maryland and Virginia. And they do not care about the people on their properties. They care about the profits they can gain from subsidized housing and lucrative government contracts. And so the council member had said that they had no solution for us. And I looked at the filing and I saw that these wealthy developers who live out in Chevy Chase and Bethesda, some of the wealthiest parts of this entire country, had maxed out donations to this council member. And I said, wait a second, you knew these people the whole time. You could have got in contact with them, or you could have helped resolve this or offer it. And the council member basically said, oh, I already talked to them. Everything's fine. We're working on it. I can't believe you're writing me and you sound so annoyed. And it's like, Jamal, you even go to hold these people accountable and you say, I don't think you guys are listening to us. You're not actually meeting the needs of the people. You continue to take donations from corporations. And they push back as if they're offended. And it's an affront that you would even say something, Jamal. If you go and tell the Democratic Party they don't care about people, which we do every day on Political Misfits, they would be so upset and they would be so disrespected by you, Jamal, and they would set aside the facts. And that's what's so disgusting.
That's so horrible, right? I mean, like, it's so aggravating. People who are political misfits have found themselves kicked out of the political space. And in many respects, it's not because they change, per se. I mean, they were a particular way ideologically, but what they realized was that the party itself wasn't on the same page. You know, it's this getting offended when you kind of make the point, well, wait a minute, the policies that you guys are pushing aren't necessarily backing up human beings, they're backing up cash. I mean, when Obama throwing his body out there for Wall Street while letting homeowners go bust, like, that's mind-blowing. Like, in many of those people, especially African Americans, that wealth was in those houses. So instead of him standing up for the people who put him in that office, he ends up standing up for the cash that gets him in that office. That's politics, unfortunately.
Well, I do want to get back to the Democratic primary and the latest from the race there. Let's take a quick break. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in DC. We're back after this.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Political Misfits?
Political Misfits who?
Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik?
Not ringing a bell, sorry.
News, politics, culture, cutting through the red and blue spin to get to the real story? From noon to 2 p.m. Eastern at 105.5 in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, it's Bob and Jamaro. Of course, come on in.
Aren't you glad you didn't say MSNBC?
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Tune in to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the latest news, commentary, and political analysis. What's really behind the political and social crisis gripping the United States and the world? Forget the spoon-fed soundbites from the pundits who know so little about so much. We bring you independent experts, analysts, and activists. Learn what really makes the decision makers take from the boardrooms of Wall Street to the West Wing of the White House. Here is where the people fighting for change speak and are heard loud and clear, 5 days a week on Radio Sputnik and SputnikNews.com.
Welcome back to Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. So we've been talking about the Democratic primary and, basically the Democratic Party, per se, more so than the primary itself. Guys, if you enjoy this content, please give us a like. You can also give us a call at 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. So, Bob, one of the cases that I mentioned early on in the monologue was that the Democratic Party is pushing forward with essentially the primaries. Now, we know there were 3 people who contracted coronavirus in Florida, Jacksonville, 2 in Broward County. And we know that they were contacted by, hundreds of people, meaning that there are hundreds of people who contacted potentially other hundreds of people, spreading this potentially out in Florida. So they went through with the primary process in the middle of a pandemic after the CDC said, don't do this. And doctors begged them not to do this. They are getting rid of the convention itself. At the very least, pushing it back to August. However, they are pushing forward with the elections. Now, let's hear the clip of Joe Biden arguing, no, it's totally safe. It's totally safe. We could totally have these elections.
A convention having tens of thousands of people in one arena is very different than having people walk into a polling booth with accurate spacing to 6 to 10 feet apart, one at a time, going in and have machines scrubbed down. But I do think there are going to be a lot more. I think you could hold the election as well, dealing with mail-in ballots and same-day registration. There's a lot of things that can be done. That's for the Wisconsin courts and folks to decide. But I think it's possible to do both, to have both more mail-in ballots, and today is the last day, I guess, till 5 o'clock to ask for one. It was an hour time difference from where I am in Wisconsin. And I think it could be done based on what I've been hearing from the news and what I understand the governor and others are saying. But that's for them to decide.
So basically, Joe Biden is saying, hey, no, we got to keep this election going. Now, I strongly think that the reason that Joe Biden is trying to keep this going, but he's okay with postponing the convention, has more to do with this notion that the convention means that something has already taken place, meaning a result has already been had by the time you get to the convention. So postponing that doesn't really matter. Not to mention the Democrats themselves don't want themselves to get ill and sick by being in a particular area where they could be compromised. However, the people who are going out and voting for Joe Biden, well, Joe Biden needs those people to vote for him. Because the longer Joe Biden goes where the public can see him, the longer there's an opportunity for Joe Biden to utterly collapse, for him to fall apart. Right now, the election is being somewhat stilted. And a lot of people might be shocked to realize that this primary process is still going on. Even though Sanders can't get out and give his power rallies, Joe Biden can't get to his salacious meetings where oligarchs run credit cards through his butt cheeks and put money into his G-string. By the same token, this election is still going on. And the oddity of the Democratic Party, where they would say openly that Trump has blood on his hands, by the same token, you should still go out when we know that people are going to get or contract this virus by being out, is astonishing. Bob, why on earth, how do they justify continuing to keep these primaries the way they're going?
Well, I mean, I think it's just to make money. It's money and power. That's how they justify it.
Are you serious? I mean, but that's
yeah, right. Like
that's so exaggerated, right? I mean, basically, look. This is not conjecture, right? This is not me embellishing. Yes, if somebody made the case that says, "Dude, you just want a longer time or longer horizon, a better chances for Sanders to win in the primary process by postponing the elections," that part is true. That's just honest.
Yeah.
By the same token, it is also rational to not put yourself in a situation where you could potentially die in a process that is contrived. Like the coronavirus will take a month or so, but the elections and the dates of those elections are contrived. They can be postponed without anything tangibly going off the rails. They just choose not to do it. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, Biden's saying that they'll have plenty of hand sanitizer and equipment to wipe down the machines. It's like, can we get some of that stuff now? Or are you like not paying attention to the lack of materials and resources? I know around him at his home he has everything he needs, but he has to realize that tens of millions of Americans don't have all of the necessary equipment just to like wipe down machines. It sounds so heartless to me. I think the DNC is fine with anything that really happens right now. I think everybody just kind of assumes Joe Biden's going to be the nominee, Donald Trump's the president, it's Biden, Trump. What else is there to have? Just get people to vote. I don't think they're going to invest in a policy strategy. I don't think they're going to try to think of some radical way to bring people together and spur a movement. The bumper sticker on every single headline across America in early November is going to say Biden, Trump, Biden, Trump. What else is there to talk about? I think people are going to make their minds based on that. If they like Donald Trump, they're cool. They're going to stay with the guy. They want something else to vote for anything else that's out there. It doesn't matter what the policy is. Doesn't matter if he shook any hands or she shook any hands. It's whoever they're told. And I think at this point, the Democrats have no choice but to go with Biden. That's the only person they can credibly put up against Trump that has the same name recognition and statute in American populist culture. And the rest of the people, Jamal, I think we're in a rare few people in our listeners here. I don't think a lot of people are paying attention to the electoral politics of this country right now. They don't know who the 25 Democrats were that just ran for president. They knew Sanders, they knew Biden, they maybe knew Warren and a couple other people. But the rest of America right now is worried about the unemployment rates we're seeing. They're worried about where they're going to get their next meal from right now. They're not even thinking about these things. And so the less the DNC can remind anybody of this even going on right now, the longer they can hang on to Joe Biden. And their hope, again, is that they can get to November where it's just Biden, Trump, and doesn't matter where Biden is. They just need his name on the ballot and for that vote to take place.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. And honestly, I even agree with you on that. The notion of trying to get anything real accomplished at this point, I think the Democratic Party just wants to coast. They're thinking, well, it's going to be Biden and Trump. Now, if your name is Sanders, though, why let them coast? I guess that's the part that aggravates me about this whole thing. Sanders gave over his support immediately, meaning there was never an issue. There was never a potential for him to galvanize and use his supporters to effectively try to get actual political concessions. So basically, they knew they could ignore him from jump, meaning we can treat your supporters like garbage. We could talk about you like garbage. We can line up almost continually, like with all of us against your interests, your policy interests. We can even attack the people who are backing you. And at the end of the day, after all that's said and done, you're still going to back us.
The Democrats, they had two things going for them. I mean, one, the electoral politics is no place for social movements. And so you're having Bernie Sanders kind of fall into a space where movements are traditionally extremely hard to build within. And then on top of it, I think what was able to get Sanders concessions in 2016 is that he came out of nowhere. It was within a year and less. He got drafted by a very energized populace of organizers, activists, and national nonprofits. And they said, let's run with this guy. And he came out of nowhere, and he was able to kind of, with that momentum, roll into the DNC convention and get those concessions. The Democratic establishment, I know it sounds crazy, had 4 years and they come up with Joe Biden. They had 4 years to slow and blunt the movement of Bernie Sanders that they didn't have in 2016. They've been able to slow him enough that I think it's hard for him to have the momentum he needs to force concessions on the party.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do agree with that. I mean, like you said, they had 4 years to plan for Sanders. Before, it was in the moment. This time around, you had 20-something people to flood the gates with the notion of trying to eat into the delegates and that type of stuff. So I agree with you on that. I guess, I don't know. I'm conflicted. My feelings for Sanders are conflicted because in one part, I recognize he did an amazing job in changing the Overton window, like this kind of hegemonic shift in regards to what's considered political discourse. By the same token, he also did not live up to the political rhetoric and wasn't willing to act in ways that was commiserate with what he was saying. And so it's this kind of feeling of like, oh man, I love the guy and I'm glad he was able to change the political dialogue. By the same token, there's a letdown in regards to his weakness in trying to get those things accomplished. It's complicated. That's the way I see it. I'm curious how you see it, because you weren't necessarily a Sanders supporter. You were just kind of like, yeah, I like some of the policy ideas, but basically I'm an organizer outside the system.
And I'm not a Democrat, and he was running as a Democrat, and I'm not a Democrat. I'm not going to support the Democratic Party in their process of picking a nominee. Can I stand on the outside and have a favorite within the fight? Can I say one party is being ill-treated by another within that race? Absolutely. Do I obviously have leanings that align with one candidate more than the other? But I think it's also important for the Democratic Party to realize a lot of people stand outside of the system, are angry at the system, and even anything within it still can't be trusted because it's either going to be co-opted or it's going to be coerced by those people who have the power within it. I was kind of curious, Jamal, you had asked a question. We have a few minutes left here before we take our next break. I was curious about this idea of buyer's remorse, where the Democrats surely have to say, I really wish we didn't land with Joe Biden. But did they have any other choice? Pete Buttigieg, I can't even say the guy's name. It's so ridiculous to even offer it. Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Deval. I mean, who else is sitting around that they could have bought? And at the end of the day, I think maybe in many ways, as crazy as it sounds, Joe Biden was the best the Democrats had to offer. And that says enough about the Democratic Party.
He was all they had to offer. Like, think through it for the moment. If Biden wasn't in this race, who else would have been the number 2 for Sanders? Can you honestly conceive of anybody else? Like, when you think of the contingent that Sanders was bringing in, Buttigieg wasn't getting the African-American vote or Hispanic vote. Klobuchar was just as bad as Buttigieg on that particular front. Cory Booker wasn't even supported by blacks. Kamala Harris, same thing. Elizabeth Warren might have gotten her bump in that process just because of, as a similar thing to Sanders in this case. But I don't know anybody else who would have been a viable candidate outside of Sanders that would have been able to pull together a coalition in the way that they pulled together a coalition. Sanders probably would have gotten the black vote in the same way he got the Hispanic vote and the Asian vote. It just so happened Joe Biden was their guy.
Says a lot about Barack Obama, too. I mean, props to the guy for doing what he did. I'm not going to take away the importance of the symbolism and what some of his team and administration were able to accomplish. But the lack of down-ballot organizing, they did, the Obama for America and his organizing apparatus that was remarkable to get him into office, basically shutting down, closing the doors, kicking their feet up on the tables within the Oval Office and not doing down-ballot organizing really left them in a tough spot. They lost 1,000 seats across the country over his 8 terms, and he did not develop grassroots political leadership, and he surely didn't develop a number 2 around him. If you're Obama and you're saying, I can't even endorse my vice president and I don't have anybody else that I'm really excited about, Deval Patrick, somebody that was rumored to be close to Barack Obama, couldn't get Obama's endorsement. He picks no one to succeed him. And then the Democratic Party is completely lost. I don't know if he wanted to stay out of it to not look like he was tainting the process, but you need to be training your down ballot people and you need to be building the party up from the grassroots up. And that was not the Obama administration whatsoever. And you end up with a Joe Biden hanging on for his life here and the nomination. Tomorrow, next on the show, we're going to be joined by Dakota Lakota Sioux writer and journalist Ruth Hopkins to talk about how COVID-19 is impacting Native communities and the latest advancements of the Keystone XL pipeline. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Files TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey everybody, my name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold Coast and Guns.
Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning, I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day. I tune to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamal Thomas. We've been talking about the past couple of weeks around the COVID-19 pandemic and the ways it's highlighting the everyday inequalities and cruelties in our society. While the government's response to pandemic outbreaks on this country's Indian reservations is likely to be just as revealing. We're joined by Ruth Hopkins, Dakota Lakota Sioux writer and journalist, to talk more on the topic. Ruth, thank you for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Pleasure is all ours. Ruth, can you give us a sense of what resources the government is promising Native communities and whether there's a gap between promises and realities?
Well, we were included in the stimulus package. Initially, we weren't going to be. The Trump administration was going to give us zilch, but thanks to some of the congressmen and senators that stepped forward, like Tom Udall and Deb Haaland, we were able to get $8 billion in funding towards tribal relief, and $1 billion of that is set aside for the Indian Health Service that serves reservation communities across the nation. And so that's actually less than what the National Congress of American Indians had suggested, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking to hear those numbers coming out of Washington, D.C. And people, I think, often forget that the United States has states and it has territories and second-class citizens. Here in Washington, D.C., one of the wealthiest parts of the country was actually termed a territory and also got limited outputs from that rescue package. And we're obviously seeing the continuation and longstanding tradition of the federal government here in D.C. underserving and under-providing support for Native communities. Ruth, the big outbreak here is on Navajo Nation that's been in the news the last few days. According to Navajo Department of Health and Navajo Area Indian Health Service, as of yesterday, 241 people on the Navajo Nation have tested positive for COVID-19, and 7 have tragically died. The nation, which spans parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, has imposed an 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew on residents, and its leaders are imploring people to stay at home and follow social distancing guidelines. Ruth, can you tell us more about what's happening on the lands there?
I believe they have 8 deaths now, unfortunately, and
Jeez.
They do everything they can to deal with the outbreak. They have a serious problem going on down there, and it's really scary and it's sad to see. And it seems to be growing, quite a bit every day. But the government itself, they were actually one of the first ones to set up a task force and really take it seriously. So I think they're really trying to do everything within their power to get it under control. And, unfortunately, we're just going to see how it plays out. But they deal with a lot of the other things that other Native nations deal with, like a higher rate of diabetes. Like Native people overall are like twice as likely to have diabetes compared to the general population. So, that's one of our concerns. Like, even though we tend to be younger overall versus the rest of society, we still have those other issues that come into play. And also things like not having enough resources and enough medical care. Like with Indian Health, it's chronically underfunded. So we're already coming into this with the deck stacked against us.
Can you describe some of the scarcity issues you guys are experiencing? I mean, like you mentioned, in some of the other areas, meaning if people are in urban areas, well, they can get access to groceries, medicines, doctors, those type of things, even in the middle of a pandemic. But in more rural areas, I would imagine that gets far more difficult to pull off. And as you said, scarcity becomes one of the issues. How have the travel restrictions impacted you in the Dakotas and the rural reservations? And are you running into some of the scarcity issues because of these restrictions?
Yes, definitely. Reservations in general tend to be impoverished. So you're already talking about people who don't have a lot of money, and like they're not able to build up a surplus and stockpile. And, even the people who are working are often living check to check. And we've had to shut down businesses and, like gaming facilities that tribes have. And so, like with my tribe, we are able to pay our gaming employees for a few weeks while we're shut down. But moving forward, it gets, scarier and scarier as to see, where this goes and if we're able to keep paying these people. But also, things like not having local grocery stores available, where it's often common. We live in the country, so you have to drive a long way just to go get supplies. And so, and then you have elders that we're trying to protect because we hold elders in high regard. So you have to have people who are able to make runs for them and get them supplies and things like that. So we're trying to balance all of that. And tribal nations are also trying to take care of their people by doing things like harvesting from their local buffalo herd. So they're able to disperse food so people have something to eat and families can get by.
That's so interesting. I'm curious, 2 questions on this. And the first one is just relatively short. The casinos have been putting out for assistance from the government, basically looking for a bailout. If the casinos get a bailout in that situation, does that apply to the tribe itself and the casino lands that are on some of the reservations?
If tribal casinos get bailout, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Or
yeah, so like in the casinos that are in like Atlantic City and that are in Las Vegas have been, for the most part, decimated. People haven't been showing up. Nobody even been going. And they've been asking for a bailout. They've been going to the federal government asking for cash in order to keep themselves open. And if they get a bailout, does that apply to you guys? Because, I guess I'm asking this, does the reservation, the fact that it's in the United States, does that make you guys eligible for that type of bailout funds? Or is there something separate and distinct from the reservation in comparison to the rest of the United States and how we give these companies cash?
Yes, we are separate and distinct. So we're not like Atlantic City or Vegas or anything like that. We fall under a totally different group of laws because tribes are sovereign nations. And so that's where we derive our ability to game and have gaming institutions. And so while they are gaming businesses, we follow under a different organizational structure. But I think it's beneficial to everyone for native gaming to have support, because not only do we provide economic development and assistance to our own tribal members, but we also have compacts with the state, and states get a lot of revenue from gaming from tribes within their, within their boundaries.
That's kind of my point, right? The state does get some level of revenue from the tribe. Shouldn't the tribe also get some level of revenue if the other issues are being bailed out? I don't know. I'm just curious about that particular thing.
Yeah,
your healthcare system, as you were making the point, the elderly and many of the people have to get to the doctors, have to get supplies and whatnot. What was the healthcare system within the tribes before the COVID pandemic, and what is it after? Has it been able to deal with the influx of illness?
for reservations, we go through the Indian Health Service it was established through treaties and through trust obligations that the federal government owes to tribes because of, what our ancestors, the legal agreements that they made with the government. And so that's where that comes from. And they've always been underfunded. Like to this very day, to the last budget, we're still underfunded. And so that's part of the reason why that stimulus was so desperately needed, but we lack enough medical facilities and equipment and resources and doctors and nurses and everything you can think of. We're already dealing with issues with that. So this COVID-19 on top of it adds an extra layer of concern. And I think, we're doing the best we can, but it is a dangerous situation.
Yeah, I'm also kind of interested how people are communicating with themselves around COVID-19, how they're trying to protect and work together. It's always unique to see how people without endless cash reserves actually have to use creative human ingenuity and humanity to care for one another. We've seen in other parts of the country where there is plenty of wealth and ability to prevent the outbreak. We had the lieutenant governor of Texas basically saying, I'd be willing to die for my younger family members to carry on this great country and project we have at the expense of my life, which, he's going to be the last one to actually offer himself up for capitalism. But obviously much different conversations happening there where you are.
Yes, we would like to hold on to our elders. And I mean, people too, so they have their own opinions and things. And, that's part of the conversation we've been having is, telling them that, no, you need to stay home and protect yourself and, maybe not go to bingo or whatever, because elders are so crucial to Native society and tribes because they hold our history and our language, and they're a crucial part of our kinship ties. And, like our languages are endangered. And so we really want to hold on to them as much as we can. And so we're doing everything that we can to protect them as much as possible. But like what you were saying with states, that's kind of been another dynamic up here. I'm in the Northern Plains, and there are 9 tribes in South Dakota. And our governor is Republican, and we are in a red state in South Dakota. But I don't think she's not doing a terrible job, but I think that tribal chairmen and presidents within the state have kind of stepped up more to protect their people, to the point of having shelter-in-place ordinances and curfews and even monitoring their borders versus South Dakota, which is more of just, they close their schools and are having a quarantine and things like that. But they have not done a shelter-in-place. So it's been interesting to see that as well.
Yeah, other big news from your neck of the woods here, a few big issues, the continued advancement of the Keystone XL pipeline and the BIPA Act in Montana. Ruth, can you give us an update on the Keystone XL pipeline? The Canadian energy company behind the pipeline, TC Energy, has said it's going ahead with construction, though it said it will determine the most proactive and responsible actions in order to ensure the safety of our crews and community members during the current COVID-19 situation. Those energy companies aren't taking care of their employees in quote-unquote good times. I can promise you that during an international pandemic, they will not be doing what they said. This pipeline traverses rural communities, reservation land included, where services are already scant. Small towns are begging people to stay away because they have barely enough resources for their own communities. How can building man camps for pipeline constructions possibly be going ahead in times like this, Ruth?
Well, you said it. I mean, that's our argument too, is they did come out in the news recently and within the last couple of days saying they are moving full speed ahead. Even though they're still tied up in court, they still plan on building that pipeline through Lakota territory. And we have always fought it, and we're still fighting it. And now we have this pandemic going on, and for some reason they are exempted from the regulations that are out there, where you're not supposed to have big gatherings of people, of non-essential workers. I do not believe that big oil is essential. I mean, they're $5 a barrel right now, and they're still insisting on bringing in these man camps, potentially, hundreds, if not 1,000 men from outside of our territory. We do not have the law enforcement. We do not have the medical facilities. to care for all of these strangers. We have our own people to worry about. And it's ridiculous that they're doing this. And I did see that they made a statement with the governor of South Dakota saying that they were going to wait until the pandemic calms down, on however many months before they start construction. But pardon me if I have a hard time believing them. They don't have a reputation for being honest with my people, so I will believe it when I see it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're seeing big news now, too, as oil production is going to be slashed to help inflate some of the costs there, oil down to 32 dollars a barrel. It seems like Russia and Saudi Arabia and the United States are going to figure out some type of basic overarching agreement to cut production and will hopefully end the, I don't know why I'm saying hopefully, will end the brutal price war. But exactly, people are making big dollars, Jamarl, and they're being told to stay at home, but yet they continue to fight for profits at the expense of the workers and those communities where these pipelines are built.
Yeah, and that's, it's one of those things when you want to know people's priorities, look at what they're doing. As we've seen, and Ruth, again, thank you for joining us. As we've seen with the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, the federal government doesn't seem to have stopped its efforts to strip the tribes of their rights. Can you tell us a little bit about Montana's BIPA Act and the lawsuit to stop it?
I don't have a lot of information about that right now.
Oh, that's fair. Fair enough. But can you at the very least talk about how the federal government, for the most part, has made deals with tribes and then, for the most part, reneged on those deals, even if we were talking about Standing Rock or this tribe here? For the most part, this has been something that has been continuous. I mean, there's been a rich history of the U.S. government taking advantage or stealing land from the various tribes, even when they have various deals or treaties between those tribes. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, it's been like that from the get-go. Like, that's how this got established, was by making treaties and reneging and unilaterally breaching those treaties. That's how it's always been, and that's how it continues to be. And the whole situation with the Mashpee Wampanoag is particularly ugly to me because, it boils down to a personal grudge that Trump has against that tribe, and jealousy and bitterness, and his typical pettiness, where he doesn't want them to be successful at gaming, to the point of where he is having the Department of Interior disestablish them and take away their land, which puts them in danger of termination. And if they can do that to them, they can do that to any tribe in the United States. So it's very serious.
Yeah.
And it's
yeah, and for me that.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, Ruth, I was just kind of amplifying what you're saying, though. And we're seeing these major changes in voting processes. And the last people that are going to make sure that somebody sends a ballot to are people on native lands. And so basically in Montana, they're trying to fight there. The BIPA Act has passed, but then basically trying to fight it and roll it back as much as possible to prevent people from even getting to vote in the first place.
Yeah, sadly, that's typical and expected. And so we always have to keep our eyes on them, even if they agree to things and sign things. And that's been the story all along.
Yeah, we greatly thank you. That was Ruth Hopkins, a Dakota Lakota Sioux writer and journalist. Ruth, thank you for joining us.
Sure, no problem.
Jamarl, in the next hour, I do hope we get a chance to talk about the latest changes across the country and who they're impacting the most. I think endlessly about how you actually mail and get people things that aren't on the internet or don't have easy access to banks or easy access to go and vote. And now you're trying to have a mail-in ballot process, which I think is incredibly important, but how you actually implement that without leaving thousands of people out of the process in local communities across this country, especially communities that are already underserved and are intentionally oppressed. They're going to be the last one anybody thinks about those systems for. Jamarl, that was the first hour of Political Misfits. We're going to be back with the second hour of news where we'll be talking about the removal of the U.S. naval whistleblower from the USS Roosevelt, nefarious actions by America's hero, Governor Andrew Cuomo, and our weekly Come At Me Bro segment. If you want to come at us for anything we've said this week or want to share what's on your mind, give us a call, 202-521-1320, 202-521-1320. 1320. You're listening to Political Misfits live in DC. We're back after this.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlaver here with Jamal Thomas. Get ready to go against the grain with us. We have another hour of show for you here. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. We're talking about the state of policing in America, the silence of military whistleblowers, and why our military is able to deliver guns and bullets, but not healthcare to American cities. First, we start here. This week, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo quietly introduced legislative text for the state budget that would completely reverse the state's new bail reform law, which has only been in effect since January 1st. New York bail reform, which passed last year, prohibits cash bail for almost all misdemeanors and nonviolent felony offenses. In the past, and in many places in this country still, if you are arrested for a nonviolent felony offense or misdemeanor, historically you've been given the option to financially bail yourself out of jail. This proves to be a problem for a lot of people because they do not have cash on hand to bail themselves out. So thousands of people, innocent under our innocent until proven guilty mantra, are forced to wait in cages until their case is heard. At the time when the law changed, COVID-19 darling and New York Governor Andrew Cuomo called it, quote, the most historic criminal justice reform in modern history in the state. While Cuomo is now trying to roll that back. Never miss an opportunity to take advantage of a crisis there, Governor. The governor's proposal, in addition to the rollback, also permits pretrial detention for a much wider range of offenses and allows judges to make guesses about the future dangerousness of a defendant based on the weight of the evidence. To talk about this and much more, we're joined by Alex Vitale, professor and author of the recent book, The End of Policing. Professor, thanks for being with us.
You bet. You're welcome.
Well, Professor Vitale, as I mentioned there, Andrew Cuomo getting the spotlight the last month here as being some type of sane, rational actor in America's capitalistic for-profit system. And yet here he is right in front of us enacting sweeping legislation that will send more people to jail during a pandemic.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things at work here, right? Of course, anyone compared to Trump looks relatively sane and reasonable. But the other is the way in which the mainstream media is looking for centrist neoliberal leaders to, pick up the mantle, so to speak, to block Bernie and a deeper, more socialist analysis, but also to make up for the fact that Sleepy Joe has totally disappeared from the scene and has become a big zero in the conversation. So they're lionizing Cuomo as their sort of standard bearer against Trump. But anyone who actually lives in New York and has had to deal with Cuomo's policies knows, just what a negative force he has been for people's movements and the well-being, of distressed communities. In the middle of this pandemic, he's cutting funding for hospitals.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. The Democratic Party at this point have been lusting, like absolutely lustering saliva coming from their mouths over Cuomo. As if, and, they've even been asking, is Cuomo going to get into the Democratic Party primary? This gets into the whole question of buyer's remorse. Just to kind of piggyback off that comment, there was a reporter that came out with a story. The gentleman's name is good when he's a Democrat. Biden shows once and for all why he deserves the Democratic nomination. This was March 15th. On March 28th, Democrats need to recruit Obama to bench Biden, find another candidate. So this goes to the whole thing of, yeah, Joe Biden is not up to snuff. They realize it on some level. Do you think they're going to bench him Like, do you think it's going to get to the convention and at some point they're going to be like, there is no way we can run this man. He's not altogether there. And they try to find somebody else to bring from the wings in order to sweep up the nomination?
Not only do I think it's possible, I think Cuomo is actively auditioning. I think that he's running these daily press conferences as an audition for that presidential backroom deal that I think, is a real possibility this summer.
But do you think that
lucky for him? I was going to say, lucky for him, there's room options now in Zoom, so they could have an online backroom conversation there on Zoom is what they're hoping for. But what that even process would look like to me, Jamarl, seems so overwhelming to even think about replacing Biden. I'm telling you, Biden could be on a ventilator, the last ventilator himself in Delaware, and they'll still run him. That they're not going to replace him in that. As much as Andrew Cuomo thinks he's going to rise to power, I just don't see it happen.
Yeah, I have a hard time seeing it too. I mean, like, I don't know what that looks like. I can't see, like, can you honestly see Biden stepping down? Well, which means they would have to forcibly take it from his, from him. That's like, that would be mind blowing. I can't see it, but they have to do something. I mean, there's clearly something wrong with Biden in this race. He can't get out a coherent word. Yeah, he has to do something, Bob.
Yeah, no, I hear you. 202-521-1320. The other big news out this morning is that the U.S. Navy has relieved Captain Brent Crozier from commanding duty of the USS Theodore Roosevelt. This dismissal comes after the Crozier sounded the alarm about an outbreak of COVID-19 aboard the USS Teddy Roosevelt. Crozier amplified the calls for aid and support after there were 93 positive test results on the ship, and more than 1,000 people have been taken off the carrier and placed into isolation on Guam. In total, 2,700 people are expected to disembark the ship this week. As to the removal of Crozier from his leadership post, Acting Navy Secretary Thomas Maudley said he had concluded that Captain Crozier allowed the complexity of the challenge of the COVID-19 breakout on the ship to overwhelm his ability to act professionally. Yes, a pandemic was on his ship and he got overwhelmed. How dare he? Professor Vitale, I think these stories really highlight how little the powers to be actually care about the actors within their ranks. The military-industrial complex, the tough-on-crime politicians, those folks who want to send young people into wars, they do not actually care about the well-being and the health of those that they are sending to fight. And here we are with an incredibly stark situation where the U.S. government and the generals are saying, hey, calm down, take a short gasp, and be quiet.
Well, just look at the recent history of the provision of medical benefits to vets through the VA. If you want to know where all these sort of warmongering politicians' hearts really lie, it's certainly not with the men and women of the military. It's with this kind of imperialist vision that they're pursuing, because they're perfectly happy to let those people, become homeless, to have inadequate health services, rather than, adequately fund these things. So the fact that the Navy is willing to, let sailors become infected and have inadequate treatment is not really new. It only concerns them to the extent that it becomes a problem in terms of future recruiting and maintaining readiness. But otherwise, these folks are dispensable.
Yeah, and Jamarl, you see here a whistleblower with this, I'm going to call the person a whistleblower that's saying, look, we're not getting the services. I think it's criminal, the situation that these people were living in, being in the military in the first place, so we can argue about the criminality of U.S. imperialism and its mechanics at a different time. But he was basically saying, look, we're asking for help. We're not getting the support needed for these critical people that our society says are heroes. He speaks out, and the next thing they do is they remove him from his position. We're seeing the same thing with medical officers and doctors across the United States being told by healthcare practitioners and private industry owners of hospitals, if they speak out, they will be fired. And yet Bloomberg and others are running these stories about Chinese whistleblowers and the China government not being allowing for people to speak out, while in their own country, people that are doctors, healthcare professionals, and military people are trying to speak out themselves, and they're being told to be quiet, yet we're not raising the same alarm here. Is American exceptionalism at its finest.
It's always shocking, right? It's like blame everybody else. And in the real terms, like we did the story yesterday, I think, where the ship from Russia brings over all of these supplies. And Trump is like, hey, Putin gave us these supplies. That's great. And then you think a little bit beyond that point, though, and you're like, well, why does the richest country on the planet need to get supplies from a country that is nowhere near as wealthy as we are? Like, that's a mind-blowing thing. And you would think the press will harp on that. Like, hey, why don't we have the ventilators? Why don't we have the test kits? Why do we have this? Why do we have that? How do we spend $1 trillion on the military and not have these things that we need? What are our priorities? But that's not the conversation. Chuck Todd will come out and say, hey, China, didn't give us right numbers, so we weren't able to kind of compensate. It's so bizarre.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Professor Vitale. Oh, go ahead, Jamal.
No. I was going to go to Professor. I was just going to ask him, how do you get people, because I agree with you with the dispensability of life in regards to our system, be it capitalistic or be it political. We give a certain amount of word salad to people in regards to saying, oh, these are the troops, these guys are our heroes, these guys are our frontliners, all that stuff. But in real terms, when you get into, well, if you really care about these people, don't you want to put resources behind these people? Well, that becomes a little different. How do you rally the population? You deal with the prison reform, and we were just talking about the COVID-19 in the context of the reform. We were also talking about the COVID-19 in the context of the prison system. How do you get the American public to see that? Meaning what we're talking about right now, that should be blisteringly obvious that the people in power of both of the political parties and the oligarch class don't care about them. And yet we toil away, giving these guys more and more profits. And even beyond toiling away, giving them more and more profits in a situation in the middle of a pandemic when this will be the time for your government to actually step up. They don't. They throw their support behind the oligarchical class. How does that not become apparent? And how do we make that apparent?
Well, I think let's look at this bail rollback in New York. I think there's something useful in looking at that. The victory of the bail reform was won through a largely kind of technocratic legislative battle where well-established groups rallied their lobbyists and their membership to put pressure on specific legislators with arguments about, human rights and racial justice to get something passed. But they didn't really do anything in the communities. They didn't build a base of support, and they didn't package bail reform as a community safety initiative that included new resources for communities to deal with folks who are getting caught up in the criminal justice system. It's not enough to just say that jails are bad and we shouldn't send people there. We also have to talk to communities about the very real safety problems that they encounter, whether it's drug overdoses or youth violence, and actually address those problems. And so the failure to do that made us vulnerable to these right-wing backlashes from the cops and the DAs and the right-wingers to say, well, you're letting criminals run the streets. And communities who are affected by crime disproportionately, when they're not given new resources or real strategies for producing safety, they will embrace the police. And similarly, when workers across the country are losing their jobs, having their pay cut, losing their benefits, and all the Democrats have to offer them is a 2% increase in unemployment insurance and no real structural change, they're going to embrace these kinds of fascist right-wing figures who make pie-in-the-sky promises to them and say, well, don't worry, Big Daddy's going to fix this for you. So we've got to get back into the communities and do real work on the ground instead of living in this abstract realm where we, say the president's terrible and we make this nice analysis about what needs to be done. If we're not talking to people about how they actually experience this on the ground, then I think we're going to lose that battle.
Yeah, it was always bizarre to me. I was talking once at a meeting with Deputy Mayor of Washington, D.C., Kevin Donahue, and he was saying, look, we understand that crime comes from the root causes of not addressing people's basic needs around health, around food, around education, around shelter. We know what leads to people committing violence, and it's my job, he was saying, his job, to basically connect the different government resources to meet the needs of the people. And so I asked him at that meeting, and I said, well, if you're the one failing to meet the needs of the people, and you're saying that's what's leading to violence, why are you not being arrested? Why are you not being punished? Because you're saying it's not their fault. It's the system that you're a part of not meeting their needs. And obviously that didn't please him, that I suggested he be arrested, but he's the one failing. It's the people that are expressing grievances, and they're not necessarily through nonviolent electoral campaign, phone call outreach. That's not the access people have. They express it much differently when they're starving or living on the streets, but yet the criminality and the arrest is always targeted at the individual. And then you create communities that are reliant on police, and we then are given police power over things that they can't change. We give them a gun, and until they actually have that gun removed, they're going to continue policing. And what is remarkable to me, Professor Vitale, we've seen in New York, despite officers being quarantined around the country, some 1,400 NYPD employees have tested positive for the coronavirus, and another 6,000 are out sick. Despite these remarkable stats, we still see police conducting buy and bust. We still see them doing aggressive policing and putting themselves in a situation where they're coming into direct contact with people on the streets. That's dangerous for those people on the streets when we're seeing these huge outbreaks within departments. And it's dangerous, obviously, for a police officer and anybody not to be following best social distancing processes, but yet we still see over-policing happening.
Well, first, I want to say now is the time when we should be talking about rent strikes and debt strikes and work strikes to force this system to start taking the needs of everyday Americans more seriously, and people around the world, frankly. But to answer your question more directly, there was a great article this morning in The Intercept by Alice Sperry about the situation in New York, where police are not only continuing to make low-level broken windows type arrests, they're also arresting people for not sufficiently social distancing. And of course, all of this arrest activity is targeting mostly Black and brown poor communities. And part of this is driven by the belief in a lot of these circles of the police and the mayor's office that if they don't micro-regulate the behavior of poor people through intensive and invasive policing, that, chaos will reign. So underlying this is a kind of deeply racist understanding of the nature of these communities, but also ultimately a disregard for their well-being, because every person who's put into the criminal justice system right now is becoming basically a vector for spreading this disease. And so we have got to quit thinking that the way to solve these problems is to throw more police at it. I think one of the things that needs to be talked about is the fact that you have the mayor and the governor on TV every day telling people to do X, Y, and Z. And frankly, in a lot of communities, people don't respect the mayor and the governor. They don't trust them. Just like a lot of us, when we hear Trump's press briefings, we don't believe half of what he says, or maybe three-quarters. Where are the voices of the community leaders who have credibility in those communities? Why aren't those voices being lifted? Why aren't we doing that kind of peer-to-peer education and treating people with mutual respect that will make these messages clear and more legitimate to people? And then finally, we know that the virus is hitting poor working-class communities the hardest, in part because those people are being forced to continue to work in service industries. So what are we doing to provide the support for them so that they aren't at such a great risk? Where are the protective equipment? Where are the enhanced transportation services that allow more social distancing instead of reduced service that packs everyone in together? So there's failures on a lot of levels here.
You said something that made this little thing in my heart explode. Now, the debt strike and the rent strikes, and for that matter, the general strikes in and of itself. We have an odd system where the public itself toils and works in order to give most of the resources to the top 1%, meaning they stay perpetually vulnerable while giving all of this wealth of their labor, the best part of their day, to a small group of human beings. And we don't necessarily overly question that system. We think that system is perfectly okay. Anything that goes wrong in these people's lives, oftentimes, whether it's not necessarily having the access to the things that they need and everything else, we're rugged individualists, and so they accept it as their own fault. not necessarily the fault of the system itself that takes priority or gives priority to interests of the rich and the wealthy, but they put it on themselves as individuals, like they weren't meritorious enough or they did something wrong. There needs to be this understanding of value. The wealth makes this argument that they did it all on their own. We pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps, missing the fact that you have a police force, a fire department, you have clean air, you have streets, you have a healthy workforce. All of those things were things that were put there by government and the collective of the society itself. The notion that they did it on their own was a lie. And right now, in the middle of a pandemic where you have warehouse workers and delivery workers being the main people in order to hold back the night on a lot of this stuff, their value should be perfectly, at this point, understood. And trying to wrestle away a new definition of the way we organize ourselves and this agreement that we have between the classes, this is a prime opportunity to have that conversation. That's why I love the fact that you mentioned general strikes and rent strikes. How would something like that operate? Because you would need something that goes across a large swath of the population in order to make that work. How does that get organized in this kind of mass political level?
So there are conversations happening, on social media and other platforms about people trying to organize some of these things. I was on a call the other day with some folks who were talking about, refusing to go back to work until, there's broad assurance that it's safe. And there's a lot of talk about people not paying their bills. And I think anyone who is financially struggling and worrying about paying for groceries while locked in at home should not be paying credit card bills, student loan debt, or frankly, rent or mortgages. Now, people have to protect themselves as individuals so that this needs to be done as collectively as possible. But we're in a moment right now where this system is completely lacking in legitimacy. They're not providing any support for the little person. There's talk about these $1,200 checks. They're still weeks away. People's rent is due now. Their credit card bills are due now. And if enough people quit paying, then these institutions are going to have to reorganize themselves. And we need to hold on to the precious dollars that we have now, not turn them over to these banks.
Yep, we have a caller on the line. I believe it's Call. Call, you there? Thank you for your patience and chiming in. Maybe you are there, maybe you're not. Are you here?
Is there anybody out there?
Is anybody listen? 202-521-1320. Professor Vitale, I wanted to ask you about kind of that question. As we see the complete breakdown of systems and strikes take place, what's remarkable to me is to see then volunteers and other people kind of rebuild critical supply chains to get services and needs to people. So if we're going to fight against Amazon, Whole Foods, and these big billionaires, we need to then replace those systems with new systems. And I've been really amazed to see how people figure out different supply chains to deliver food to seniors who are supposed to be at home, giving people medication and different things like that. And for me, this is another indictment on a system that's completely broken because of programs like the 1033 program, which you've talked about extensively. For those people that are not familiar, the 1033 program allows the transfer of excess military equipment to civilian law enforcement. So we have supply chains in this country for guns, for weapons, for mass vehicles to get to any locality around the country. And now in a time of emergency, the Department of Defense and Pentagon says basically we have ventilators and we have life-saving equipment, but we have no idea how to get that out to people. Isn't that an indictment on a system during a pandemic?
Absolutely. And I've written about this in relationship to climate change. When we look at the increase in flooding, the seriousness of hurricanes, where is the national capability for rapid response with swift water rescue vehicles, with more helicopters? Instead, we're pouring money into armored vehicles for police and sniper rifles, and this is completely misguided. You talked about these kinds of mutual aid efforts. I lived through Hurricane Sandy in New York, where FEMA was basically completely missing in action. and worked closely with groups like the Red Hook Initiative that took it upon themselves at the neighborhood level to secure resources, to set up systems for distribution, to harness volunteer labor. And we need to be looking to exactly those kinds of responses, whether it's to a flood or hurricane or tornado, or to a virus, or frankly, the failings of this kind of neoliberal system. So rather than more centralization and more militarization of response, we need more decentralization.
Yeah, I appreciate that focus on decentralization. As somebody who organizes in my own community, you see most of the things that happen directly around you are because of decisions of people that live pretty close to you that really do affect you. And so being able to organize within your own neighborhoods, you can start to address issues around insecurity of food for people, the under-resourced of shelter, of education, of health care. Obviously, those decentralized communities don't have the same easy access of resources and wealth. And that, for me, Professor Vitale, is always one of the big hurdles, that the government and military have such an overwhelming dominance on the amount of money that in communities you try to address people's issues and you can say, I hear you, we care about you, we're going to respond to you. But if you can't bring them then the resources the next day, or you're asking people for years of political education and movement, it becomes really hard to keep the masses moving forward. So I'm kind of curious, from your lens, where do people feel the most energy to build on top of these movements, and how do you effectively decentralize collective power that is in the hands of so few?
Well, in the work that I do, focused on the criminal justice system, there's a broad national movement now that some people refer to as a kind of invest-divest movement. And this is about pointing out both the harms that the criminal justice system causes and the huge expense that goes along with it, and talking about concretely how that money could be redirected into real programs that directly address community-identified needs. So it's not about just a broad anti-poverty program. That's a bigger question that we've got to keep fighting towards. But what are we doing about domestic violence? What are we doing about drug overdoses? What are we doing about youth violence? There are interventions that we could undertake today to address those problems outside of the criminal justice system if we just had access to those resources. And of course, at a national level, we could be having the same conversation about the F-35 bomber and, nuclear-powered aircraft carriers like the Teddy Roosevelt. Why is there always money for another bomber program that doesn't even work, but there's never enough money to adequately fund schools?
Yeah, it's like remarkable thinking about the Teddy Roosevelt. There's more weapons. The price of all of those weapons could easily save the lives of thousands of soldiers that are on there trapped without adequate health care. Professor Vitale, you're working on a new state-saying project during the quarantine called The Critical Criminologist. I'm excited for the project. I saw you had a new episode out. Tell us more about that and how our listeners can check it out.
So it's on my YouTube channel. You can just search for me, Alex Vitale, on YouTube, or you can follow me on Twitter at @avitale, AVITALE. And so it's a weekly interview with criminologists and activists across the country and internationally who I think are doing really interesting cutting-edge work. We're going to talk about things like police and prison abolition and community organizing, along the lines of these kinds of invest-divest strategies. And so new episodes every Tuesday, and it's currently video, and it'll be coming out as a podcast soon as well.
That's Professor Alex Vitale, professor and author of the recent book, The End of Policing. Professor Vitale, thank you so much for joining us.
You're most welcome.
Let's slide in a few calls here before we come at you, Jamarl, in our weekly Come At Me Bro segment. Call, I'm going to try you one more time. Hopefully you're there this time. Are you?
I'm here. I'm here.
My guy, what's up, man? How you feeling today?
Okay. Hey, Jamarl.
You don't sound excited. You don't sound all that enthused. What's going on?
Jamarl, I'm going to come at you, bro, with a compliment.
Uh-oh. Go for it.
The upcoming Corbyn loss due to Brexit, and so many others didn't have a clue about that, and I really think you don't get enough credit for that. Oh, can you hear me?
Thank you. I
He came at you with a compliment. What a curveball.
Thank you. Because there were a lot of people out there who was haters because I kind of pointed out that Jeremy Corbyn was being cowed by his own party and he was being weak. And that weakness was not necessarily going to be attended to. And look, I thought it was obvious, but there were a lot of people out there who were running around, Corbyn is going to come back. Corbyn is going to come back. It's like, dude, this election is about Brexit. And that's the one issue that he's not taking. So I appreciate you noticing my awesomeness in that.
Well, I don't appreciate it. I want him to come at you, Jamar. That came at with you with a hug. That's fine. That's fine. Faithful, loyal listeners, we'll take those over the haters any day of the week. We got one more caller on, Adam. Adam, I hope you are doing well today. What's on your mind?
Hey, Jamal, what's up? Hey, I forget the other guy's name, but I've been a fan.
My name is Bob. Nice to meet you.
What's going on, man?
Hey, nothing. So I want to call in and give my 2 cents on the corona issue. So a little background, I am a medical professional. I work in laboratories. So I have a little bit of insider information about a lot of things that, like, the public seems really sensational about. I'll let you come at me with any questions you have first, and then I'll give you my 2 cents later. Like, what are y'all's thoughts about the testing issues? What are y'all's thoughts about, like, the medical communities, what they could and couldn't do at this time?
So you said, what are our thoughts on the medical community, what it could do? Well, from the standpoint of the medical community, its power more so is influence. I mean, ideally, we would look to the medical community for understanding and information on what's taking place in order so we can take provision so we don't, A, kill ourselves, but also to ideally inform the government that what needs to be done in order to cut down on loss of life, whether that's shutting the government down, whether that's testing supplies, whether that's protective equipment. Those are things that you would go to the medical community in order to understand what needs to be done. So that's their influence. The catch is you need a government that's attentive to that. And unfortunately, to varying degrees, that doesn't necessarily seem something that we have. We don't have test kits. We don't have the protective equipment for our staff. Like the guests just had, Alex made the point that we're still out there policing for petty crime and whatnot, in spite of the fact that these cops could potentially be passing over the virus. We just aren't doing these things.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you had questions for him as a lab worker, I apologize. I thought you asked.
No.
I'm sorry.
But like, there's a time delay here. Like, I'm agreeing with half, and there's some that I want to nuance a little bit. When you talk about the government response, clearly the Trump administration has just been, I mean, my God, where do you even start? Well, we're not even going to talk about that fucking misfortune. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to drop bombs. Anyway, we're not even going to get into all that. But as far as trusting the medical community, now, first off, when it comes to things like social distancing and contact tracing, the simple fact that the public is not ready to hear is that these measures are not as effective as they think they're going to be. All right? And the more the government and the public believes that we can control the situation more than we actually can, the more they're just going to blame outside forces for things that are truly out of control. And I'll be the first to admit that our executive branch has done worse than nothing. I mean, we're talking about the Trump like literally just lying to people.
Yeah.
Severity of the issue.
No, Adam, I hear you. It is absolutely shocking stuff. This has been a big theme the last few weeks, the lack of response by the U.S. government. There was plenty of time to do proper testing, tracking, and tracing to be able to quarantine and stop the spread of the virus. This country has waited way too long, and if anybody is continuing to listen to Donald Trump every day, all day, on anything he's saying, we're all going to be in a lot of trouble. Adam, thanks for your call. I got to let you go. We got to get to this next break before we get the chance to come at Jamarl. We're on Political Misfits Live in D.C. We're back after this.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. You hear that sound. It is Friday. How strong do you feel today? Let's get into some come at me, bro. My name is Jamal Thomas, here with Bob Schlehuber. You can give us a call at 202-521-1320. You help make this segment what it is, what's on your chest, what's bugging you, or what do you just agree with? So let's start off here. A day after Bernie Sanders sat in a remote interview with Seth Meyers, Elizabeth Warren ends up on Seth Meyers' show. Now, Warren has been rather quiet as of late. There have been people out there who don't entirely pay attention to politics, with the exception of broad themes, that are still scratching their heads as to why Warren didn't back Sanders. Now, Seth is one of those people, and Seth, who has Elizabeth Warren on the show, gets to ask her, hey, why aren't you backing Sanders? It's just kind of weird. I mean, you're grifting for money and votes from the left, and you ran almost as if you were an exact replica of Sanders, exception of having a vagina. How on earth can you not back the guy now? Let's listen to Warren gracefully dodge this question.
You know, again, I really just want to say right now, you know, it's less about the politics and much more about the crisis that our country is in. And I think that's really where our focus got to be at this moment. So that's where I'm keeping my attention right now. We don't get to do any political rallies at this moment anyway.
So, you know, the wild part about this is back in 2016, we had a situation with Elizabeth Warren when asked, why didn't you back Sanders in that particular race? And she made the point, I thought it was a great primary. Now, the primary that she's saying she thought was great was one where at one point she said it was rigged. And then a day later, she said it wasn't rigged. Well, the DNC chair came out and made the point that they effectively tilted the race for Clinton. This was not a good race. And just like in this particular case, using the coronavirus as a dodge doesn't necessarily pass muster with me. Here's the question. Will Elizabeth Warren pay for this? Meaning, will there be political issues or political concessions that take place of her being held accountable for running in the race where she essentially tied down Sanders while Joe Biden could get the killing blow? And I can go on Super Tuesday and give 3 or 4 different states potentially to Sanders, with Warren not being in the race. Turns around and attacking the guy. Many of the people who were supporters of hers didn't understand what she was doing, because many of them were conned into thinking that these two people were working somehow in tandem with one another. Bob, will there be consequences? Will there be people who say, yeah, I'm not voting for her, or I can't put my support behind her, and if you make her the vice president, you're not going to get my support because of it? Or is the left just going to turn around and be like, hey, we need her to be vice president, and if she runs again for the Senate, they'll back her again for the Senate? Will there be any level of accountability with this and her?
Yeah, I mean, I need to preference everything with the fact I didn't see this pandemic coming. So who knows in the world we live in? I think the repercussions are like, I don't care about Elizabeth Warren anymore. Like that's the output. Is like the people that lean left in this country, anywhere from the center to like the far extreme left, just don't care about Elizabeth Warren anymore. She fell in line in the Democratic Party. She doesn't get to be the shooting star. She doesn't get to be the face of that party. She doesn't get to be president anymore. There's nothing that she gets out of, like, I still don't get exactly what you get out of it later in your political career, you're trying to develop an arc and narrative that you stand out historically. Is that not what you want ego-wise? Do you not want to say, I was on top, I was the one that I got the lights on, I got the microphone, and she somehow falls in line with the Democratic Party and thinks that they're going to give her the spotlight at any time? That's kind of the repercussion. And sure, maybe you'll have a strong seat at the table and you'll be some great surrogate for Joe Biden, since he's going to be quarantined for probably his entire presidency, and they'll leave you out there and you'll feel great to get the applauses, but you're never going to be the head of that party. And I think if she would have gone with Sanders, I think Sanders would have stepped aside pretty early on in the process and really given her an equal voice, at least signature legislation pieces from one of the cabinet positions that were meaningful, that were historic, that stood out. But yet you back the guy who's trying to reach out to Donald Trump today to make some type of grand gesture to the opposition party. That's who you get it behind. That's the repercussion to me, is having to be stuck with the Joe Bidens, the Simone Sanders, the Neera Tannens of the world. Yeah, you get nothing out of it from my perspective.
Wow. Wow. Tell me how you really feel, Bob.
I'm riled up. This is where we call that things, Jamal. This is the segment for it. But what do you win from that?
I agree with you. I mean, look, this is. I guess this is not one of the come at me bro ones where we disagree on. I guess my thing is, look, I don't think she's ever going to be made head of the party. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, even people who want to move to some degree to the left, you didn't endorse Sanders. Like, you had a situation where even if Sanders lost, he was still considered the left's choice. Meaning, when everybody else lined up, the left chose Sanders. And Warren, who effectively ran that race on the left, didn't. That's an issue, right? Like, how do you come back from that? How do you turn around and run in a later race, running with this notion that I'm a lefty, and you didn't support the left in 2016 or 2020? It just seems like, I don't know how she skates on this. By the same token, I do know that lefties have a certain degree of cowardice in them and would be open to backing her again. And so I'm generally thinking that this probably wouldn't dig into her over the course of the few years. That basically this will.
Out of that.
Yeah.
The clip too, and obviously we are biased a little bit towards Bernie Sanders and the treatment of the media. So you can go ahead and argue with us that he has been well treated. I would laugh at that. 202-521-1320. But here you have Whoopi Goldberg on The View, primetime daytime television for millions of Americans, belittling Bernie Sanders, going in at him, interrupting him, saying, you should have dropped out. How dare you do this? Seth Meyers, a late night talk show host, has Elizabeth Warren on. Ask her a pretty basic, straightforward question that I'm sure she's sick of answering, but doesn't interrupt her, doesn't speak over her. And Elizabeth Warren, the disgust in her voice, as if that question's not going to be asked by her when she's the one that made a historic decision in that moment, shows this kind of disgust towards the interviewer of how dare you ask me that question when that's the only question people want to ask me about right now.
Yeah, her campaign has been a little weird. I mean, a lot of the stuff has been really, really bizarre. And the fact that, we end up with Biden as a standard bearer for all of this, it just gets even bizarre still. Let me ask you this. Do you think that part of the reason, or part and parcel to the reason, that Trump is able to get off on this? I know some people make the case that this has a lot to do with just America doesn't necessarily inspect and deal with issues immediately. But that wasn't true with New Orleans. I mean, when we had New Orleans effectively go under during the Hurricane Katrina, Bush got blamed for that immediately. Like, that wasn't something that later on, it became very clear very early on that the Bush administration was comically inept. But that's not what's happening here. Is it opposition?
Kind of, Jamar. I mean, but at the same time, the post-Hurricane Katrina fallout was then what happens in Houston with hurricanes later. You see the complete privatization. I mean, all of those things in Louisiana, and you're seeing Louisiana, thanks to Mardi Gras and officials continuing there to keep the bars and restaurants well open, well past when they should have closed them, that people are still getting devastated there. So as much as Bush may have not been criticized in the moment, did that actually lead to any change long term? I mean, I guess, yeah, he loses the momentum for the GOP, but in many ways, it seems like the long-term ramifications have gone unaddressed still.
Wow, yeah. I mean, this has been an aggravating time for me. Like, I guess to me, I look at this, and I know for you, you're an organizer, and with the organization stuff, you realize, probably understood for a while, that the government itself wasn't looking out for the interests of the population. If it was, you wouldn't have to be working so hard. Meaning, I wouldn't have to do a show the other day saying Bob has been doing a great job in regards to his organizing and getting help to various people in the community that need it, because the government, who's supposed to be doing it, would be doing that.
I'm just trying to chill, Jamal. I'm just trying to kick back and relax out here. These politicians are ruining my day.
They're ruining your day.
Jamal, I do have to get a gripe out here because I'm ready to come at somebody just around my disgust for somebody. I'm gonna use the word hatred. I hate. If I had to say, if I hate one thing, it's saying that I hate things. I'm a peace builder, Jamal. I deeply believe that if humans can be connected and we can build that tower of Babel of shared communication and purpose, even if that purpose is that there is no purpose, we can do it as humans. And if we work together, this world would be a little bit more peaceful. So with that goal, everyone's important. If you're listening out there, you're part of the movement. We need you to help organize. Everyone can play a part. And ultimately, the system that is oriented around collective goals of meeting the needs of society will overcome any individual actor. Jamal, I get it. It sounds extremely naive. I agree. But perception is reality. And as long as I stay within my own little bubble, I'm fine. So when I saw what I'm about to say, it pains me so much to say this because I honestly do want the best for the masses, Jamal. I want everyone to deeply work together, and I want to trust all people that they have the best intentions for all people. So when I say what I'm about to say, I do deeply, deeply, truly mean it. I hate Jared Kushner. He's the worst of the worst, Jamal. I hate the guy. He's a son of a formerly imprisoned real estate developer and the son-in-law of the one and only Donald J. Trump. Yes, he's worse than both his father and father-in-law. If anyone tells me I shouldn't hate him, or if anybody tells me anybody's worse than Jared Kushner, I will come back at you harder than you could imagine, Jamal. My hate for the man runs deep. And let me first start with today. According to Vanity Fair's Gabrielle Sherman, when New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said that the state would need 30,000 ventilators at the apex of the coronavirus outbreak, Jared Kushner decided that Cuomo was being alarmist, saying, I have all of this data about ICU capacity. I'm doing my own projections, and I've gotten a lot smarter about this. New York doesn't need all the ventilators, Jamal. The city's running out of body bags, and this idiot of a man who has the ear of the president of the United States says we don't need any more ventilators. This is the same guy whose own data is the same guy who basically took his family's real estate company over after his father was sent to prison. The guy paid $1.8 billion, a record at the time, for a Manhattan skyscraper at the very top of the real estate market bubble in 2007. The second before the whole bubble burst, Kushner paid $2 billion for a very sharp bubble bursting building, to say the least. And Kushner's last few years of policy have me hating him even more, Jamal. And I'm talking about the humanitarian crisis taking place in Palestine. That may have irked me the most. Kushner, playing amateur American lawyer, injected himself into the centuries-old Israeli-Palestinian conflict. His credentials for being there, Jamal, he had read some 25 books on the matter. The deal of the century was dead on arrival, and yet now Kushner is telling us he's the man to keep us all alive. Jamal, please, I dare you to tell me I should hate anybody more on the planet than Jared Kushner.
Oh, that's a tough one, man. That's a tough one. I got to be honest. I hate George Bush more than I hate Kushner. I mean, because
George Bush?
The George Bush, yeah. Because however bad Kushner is, however bad he is, and I agree with everything you just said there. Every iota, every word that you uttered, every consonant, every syllable, agreed. You got me. But George Bush got 1 million people killed, and we are literally in a war right now over the past, 20 years, as a result of his actions, the drone program, the torture, the black sites, all of those things were inspired by George Bush, the destruction of habeas corpus. I mean, I guess I'm making the point that between 1 million people losing their lives and a war going forward for the last 20 years and us breaking people and ripping them to shreds, that bugs me more than
I hear you. Here's my pushback. Is George W. Bush is 73 years old. The guy's getting towards the end of his life. He probably knows that the fake heart guy that Cheney's hooked up to and can get an endless beating heart and stay alive forever. But say he is to basically come to terms with old age at some point. Kushner's only 39. And that for me irks me more because this guy's going to be around for decades on end moving forward. And these people constantly fail upwards. I mean, the guy couldn't get the New York Observer off the ground, which he bought, and he said it was going to revolutionize the world of media, fails to do that. And somehow now he's dictating the federal distribution of ventilators to states. and the guy's 39, Jamal. He's just showing up on the scene. I hear you, though, with George W. Bush for being around for a while, but there's something extra evil about the youngness of him.
That's a good point, Bob. I mean, because basically, like you said, George Bush is on his way out. He is going to have a very warm, blisteringly hot cell below the ground at some point, whereas Kushner is only 30. He's going to be here for like 40, 50 years. And he's doing this horrible stuff at 39. He hasn't even gotten, heavily into the political space, like where he's in some kind of party or his own person or something to that effect. So, yeah, I guess fair enough. If you could extrapolate how bad he's going to be, this kind of exponential curve, maybe.
And part of the Trump dynasty has kind of got to scare you. And I will give a shout out to the Bush family genetics there. Obviously, HW staying alive well into his 90s. That's what white privilege and endless wealth will do for you when you have access to all the health and proper nutrition that you need to stay alive. That's going to go a long way for you. So maybe more congratulations on being privileged and not dying younger for the Bush family. But Kushner, I mean, if you think about like who takes over the Trump dynasty, if there is a dynasty, we had one of the Trump sons, Ivanka, or Jared, who's already kind of stepped up in all these bizarro ways, even the relationships with the Saudis and Qataris, it shows that he has connections well beyond kind of this little influence in the United States. Obviously, if Trump's out of office, I got to imagine Kushner falls by the wayside pretty quickly, but Trump's still in office, and it looks like he could be headed that way for re-election come November. That scares me, Jamal, and that has me hating Jared Kushner.
Fair enough. I can't complain with that. I can't argue with it. I mean, look, I don't know what Kushner does if Trump loses. I don't know what Kushner does if Trump stays in office. I would imagine that he may consider this a job at this point and look for, life in the political space.
Yeah, or just chills on a beach somewhere on his family's endless money. It's disgusting stuff. Jamal, we got to take one more quick break.
Yeah,
let's take a quick break. Yeah.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was just saying that's what I would do. If I was a billionaire, I would just say,
okay. It's confirmed. If any of us were billionaires, we'd be on a warm beach kicking it right now like one Jared Kushner. Thanks for letting me rant in our weekly Come At Me Bro segment. We'll take a quick breather. We're back after this. Political Misfits live in D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We're back after this.
We call Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan the most disruptive radio show in America.
It's a great show, and we have a lot of fun.
We come to you live from Washington, D.C. every Monday through Friday morning.
What I like best is that we bring in experts from all over the world. From Barcelona, from Egypt, from Seoul, South Korea.
From Newark, New Jersey. We try to bring people great guests, great calls from our listeners, and, of course, stupid jokes. And we do it with two hosts that have very different viewpoints. Now, here's the thing, Garland. A lot of people would think you and I would just argue. I mean, I'm a Republican Trump supporter.
And, of course, I am a progressive Democrat Bernie Sanders supporter.
The surprising thing is how much we actually agree on.
And you won't be surprised because you're going to find out just how much you agree and just how much you enjoy this show.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schleber here with Jamarl Thomas. We're reaching the end of our week. We do have a caller on the line. Joe, are you here with us still?
Oh.
Joe, hey, what's up, man? Thanks for your patience. What's on your mind today?
Hey, so I work in the healthcare community. I wanted to talk about what the actual things that the executive branch can do to solve this situation. Like, there's a lot of talk about, criticizing Trump, which is clearly legitimate. I mean, but when we're talking about things that can actually be done to empower the healthcare community, what are we talking about here? Now, I work in labs, and I understand that the need isn't anything regulatory. It's not anything personnel-wise. It has to do with something you wouldn't expect. It's plastics. The problem isn't trying to get, accurate testing. It's not trying to get equipment on the market. Those things are actually already on the market, on the ground level. What is holding mass testing levels back is the waste, is the plastics. That's the thing that's holding our labs back, and apparently all the labs in my tri-state area. And if I'm going to expound that, that's the entire country, and that's why America is having a problem itself. But no one is talking about that. No one's talking about people.
Are you talking about getting the? I guess walk me through this, because I've been seeing the rise of people around the country using 3D printers to actually like take binder plastics and make face masks for health professionals, and so you're seeing the creative mass making PPE equipment. For me, the number one thing the federal government could do is enact some type of control over the supply chains to adequately distribute any reserves they have, as well as then get out to the 600-700 different companies that are part of the ventilator making process to get those out to people. I don't think this federal government, and well before Donald Trump, was in a place to rapidly deploy those supply chains to get the plastics where they would need to be. Is that the correct analysis, or are you just saying the purchasing of plastics writ large?
Absolutely right. You're on the same train of thought as me. You went in a different direction with it with PPE, but I'm talking about like hazard bags and like reaction vessels and all the things that are involved with laboratory testing that you really wouldn't think about, which actually make up the majority of the cost of laboratory testing. And that's frankly, this is something that we could really get into about the problem with capitalism in general, where the centralization of laboratory testing could be an individual lab at large state-funded facilities, but instead they are all leeches to reference labs and like these larger national corporations. Because they
Joe, I hear you. Send us more information to Sputnik Misfits on Twitter at Sputnik Misfits. I would love to look more into the story around labs and the challenges they're facing right now. Shoot us a note there, and we'll make sure to cover that on our show next week. It seems like there's a lot of chatter from our listener base wanting to hear more about that. Jamal, I just want to sneak in one last story here with our final minutes. Vice first published the story. They had gotten the hands on written notes from a meeting of Amazon leadership, including CEO Jeff Bezos, that described how Amazon planned to smear an organizer and use him to undermine labor efforts. Amazon General Counsel David Zapolsky wrote in notes from the meeting forwarded widely in his company regarding Chris Smalls, who is a key Amazon organizer after he got fired. He writes, "He's not smart or articulate, and to the extent the press wants to focus on us versus him, we'll be in a much stronger PR position than simply explaining for the umpteenth time how we're trying to protect workers." So Amazon thinks they're onto something. They think Smalls is dumb. They think people won't like him. So they're like, yeah, okay, let's say this guy is a safety hazard. Let's say he's a liar. We are snobs, so we aren't impressed by him. And every step of the way, we'll turn people toward him and say, look at the dummy. That's who the strikers. It's disgusting, Jamal. In more notes about how the deal was bad press, you see how they then tried to hone in on the organizer, Smalls. He says, the notes say, we should spend the first part of our responses strongly laying out the case for why the organizer's conduct was immoral, unacceptable, and arguably illegal in detail, and only then follow with our usual talking points about worker safety. Make him the most interesting part of the story, and if possible, make him the face of the entire union organizing movements. These companies, Jamal, are incredibly strong. Quite scary stuff there, how they individually target organizers.
Yeah, but this is kind of one of those ideological things that kind of just float up throughout society. I mean, we do the same thing in politics. Like, is there any difference between Amazon? Well, there is a difference, but the attacks on a company, on an individual, in order to kind of deflect from their own failings, the fact that they're screwing over their workers, the fact that you had these people who were over there that was potentially going to get ill because they were lying about the number of people who were contaminated with the disease and the illness. Like, from their standpoint, we don't want to have to deal with the reality of that. So let's find some other reason that we can focus people's attention on. It's the same thing when Trump says, yeah, China didn't tell us the number of illnesses that they had, so, we weren't prepared. Like, it's the exact same thing. The only difference is one is hitting a country, the other one is a multinational corporation that doesn't pay any federal taxes, attacking basically an individual worker.
Yeah, no, Jamal, quite disgusting stuff there. A somber note to end our third week. I think it's been 3 weeks. It's been a bit of a blur here. Big shout out to all of our guests today, Donna Davis, Professor Alex Vitale, and Ruth Hopkins. Big thank you to Jamal Thomas for joining me for a great week of shows. Big thank you to our radio studio team and our producer, Michelle Whitty. Thanks to all those who called in this week. We'll be back on Monday with a brand new show. Now get back to organizing.